everybody, and welcome to the Are You Aware podcast. My name is Fawn Preston, and I am here with Dr. Dean Gray, as well as Angel Prater, and we are excited to have you guys here today. How's it going, ladies? How's your day?
Good day today. Good day.
Yeah.
Busy, long.
I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
great day. Training intentional peer support with Folk Time all day. And with Fawn and with Lita Ross. It's been a great day.
Yeah, it was an awesome day.
Mm-hmm.
Good
We're
things.
lucky to have you.
Yay, thank
Mhm.
you.
Mhm.
No, it's good. Where to get started, right? So we talked about aware highlights. Since we're doing this every week, we're excited to maybe highlight an organization that we feel is doing good things, is doing it right. So we want to do a highlight today for Ascending Flow, who we think is just like amazing. You want to talk about Ascending Flow?
Yeah, I'd love to. So Ascending Flow was started by T and Talilo, and they're a young couple who come from a pretty rough background, and they saw an opportunity to create a program that would utilize the four elements of earth, water, wind, and fire, and reach kids or young people who have fallen through the educational cracks or who have been marginalized, maybe involved in gangs, or maybe come from families that are extremely impoverished, or various different walks of life. And they had originally opened up a drop-in center to work with young people in Klamath Falls, and they really struggled to get the community support. And so New Narrative here in the Portland metro area actually established a MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with them a couple years ago to support the growth and the administrative capacity of their program that they lacked, so that they could work with kids aging out of the foster care system. So
Amazing.
they teach them how to tell their stories with rap or music, art. They've got some local artists that did some murals on their building. They created a drop-in center. They got a recording studio.
It's gorgeous.
I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
awesome.
it is so much fun to see, Toledo had come out of prison and really wanted to do something different. And he came from a very rough gang lifestyle. And he's like, how do we reach these kids? And his partner, T, she's amazing. They just had their first baby. And so we just wanted to do kind of a shout out to some really amazing out of the box kind of work. And and shout out to New Narrative for taking the risk of really not knowing how to roll this out and really connecting with youth transitioning out of the foster care system. They help them with school, they help them with employment, they help them with housing. They're just doing some amazing trauma aware work, and I'm really proud to be part of that. So
Same.
I'm very excited to hear about that work. One of the things that I like in the story that you mentioned is that focus on helping people find their own voice and tell their authentic story. You know, I mean, how do you find the words? And sometimes it's music or dance or creating art or rap. Yeah. But I think it really is invaluable to help people who feel somehow outside of the dominant political, social, cultural hegemony and find strength in having their authentic autobiography.
absolutely.
Yeah,
and
very
it
exciting.
really supports kind
It's
of the whole
empowering.
person. It's very empowering. It's providing a platform for empowerment for these young people and to feel a sense of purpose
and justice.
and
A sense of
justice. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
telling
tell
your
their
own
story.
story.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I just feel like that is a huge part of finding your healing, is like finding your passion. You know, like passion equals purpose.
Yes.
You know, and so them being able to find their passion through art or music music or, whatever it is, gives them purpose and gives them a reason to move forward and gives them a reason to heal, and T and Talila were like dynamite. They're awesome. Like who wouldn't want to go hang out with those guys,
That's awesome.
because they're great. So yeah, I'm glad that we chose them as like who we were going to highlight today, because they're doing great things.
And mazel tov to their new baby.
Yeah.
Family
Yes, I
edition.
know.
Wow.
Christmas baby.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of leads us into kind of our topic of people are dying because our system is broken, right? Well, this is a perfect example of how to think outside the box and do things that are not within the scope of our dominant medical model. It's in conjunction with, not to replace, but to fill the gaps and to meet the needs of those who don't fit in this other box, or maybe they weren't thriving in this box. And
Nobody's thriving in this box.
yes, you're right. Let's just call that shit out, right? Like we got a broken
thriving in
system.
this box?
This system is not working for most people. It's
Yeah.
not working for most people. We spend more money here on healthcare and healthcare administration than any other country in the developed world. Our outcomes are diminished. The outcomes are becoming worse just in terms of lifespan and quality of life. I think Costa Rica just recently overtook the United States with respect to certain healthcare outcomes.
Wow.
It's astounding. It's astounding. We spend some huge proportion of the investments on health occur in the last 5 years of life. We're really getting things exactly backwards. I don't think we could get it more backwards if we planned to do so.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
it's driven by external forces. It is not driven by, it's not person centered, is it?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Definitely.
No. And although there's some great people working in our system, and so I just want to call that out, because often, people who work within the system, it's hard for them to hear that the system isn't working or that it's broken, and
because they're trying really
they're
hard.
trying really hard.
Yeah.
But who's driving the funding that's driving the treatment model is the problem in a lot of ways. And then, research show that people are dying 25 years earlier than the average person if they've had a mental health diagnosis. And that's not just, we're just making this shit up. Like, people are dying because they have a lack of social determinants of health. The medications are affecting their liver and their kidneys. And I know so many people in this last 10 years that have been amazing advocates for systems change that have died as a direct result of the medications that they took for decades.
Yeah.
And again, some medications are helpful, but they should be just a temporary solution, not the lifelong solution. And we're not checking CBCs, complete blood counts to check vitamin D. We're not checking, people's thyroid. We're not doing that work before we start medicating people on these psychiatric medications.
Yeah,
and
totally.
It's not okay.
And I think, unfortunately, a lot of that happens because the care is happening in an urgent, or some cases an emergent setting. People really don't get the care they need until there's a crisis, and you don't get the best care when you're in crisis mode.
Right.
Yeah, and then it's just very difficult to sometimes circle back around and really get the care that you need and have the assessments that were missed in that urgent or emergent care setting. Or if the lab work is completed, following up with this person who was there in a state of crisis. That kind of follow-up really falls to the primary care system. And there's not robust engagement for folks who are struggling with certain diagnoses,
Absolutely.
I think there's also part of in addition to that, how do we define what crisis looks like, right? Just because somebody's in a big place of what appears to be complete distress, often what intentional peer support teaches is we're putting that fire out rather than just sitting with people during those big times of large emotion or distress and letting them release that from their body. And for something new to emerge from that. Often we are taught to suppress emotion. And when we suppress, it's like putting these garbage bags full of crap inside of us and keeping it stuck. Eventually it comes out our neck sideways. And how do we, like, there's some really cool things that are happening across the country where they're creating break rooms where people go and break things as part of their release, right? But oh no, our system says that's dangerous, that's too much liability and risk, so therefore we can't do that, when really maybe somebody's just really fucking pissed off and
Needs to get
has
it
been
out.
angry for a long time and need to get it out of their body, and then they can blossom from that. That's one thing to think about, crisis as an opportunity rather than a problem to be stopped. How do we rethink it from a hope-based perspective rather than this fear?
I was going to say, I think it is the reactions are driven by fear and liability, the things that you just mentioned. Yes. Well, gosh, we'll have to take so many steps backwards in order to start over again and really get this right, I think. But I think the time is now.
Yeah. Well, and a focus on holistic, right? Like just because, something works for one person, it doesn't necessarily work for others. This sounds cheesy, but like when I first got out of jail and I had my daughter, they told me I had to go to AA, however many days a week I had to, sign in. Didn't work for me. They gave me multiple different medications for my bipolar. Once again, this one didn't work, so they switched me to another. This one didn't work, they switched me to another. They gave me group therapy, they gave me one-on-one therapy, and those kind of helped. It was nice to have somebody to talk to, especially since I was alone in Michigan, 17 years old. But what actually helped was I was in this tiny little apartment with my daughter, had hardly anything, hardly any furniture, nothing up on the walls. And I would create these routines for myself. And like, I'd watch Rebecca's Garden every Saturday. And it was like, she'd make a candle and I'd make a candle. And then I was proud of this beautiful candle that had coffee beans in it, on my table. So when people came over, I was like, ooh, look at my candle. I made it. It made me feel good about myself. So I was like improving my aesthetics, improving my place. And I was proud of that because it was something I was doing and making, with my hands. And then, I had routines with Raven, because she was this little baby. And so I would sing her like Disney songs, and so we'd be in the bathroom going like, hey, clear the way in the old bazaar, hey, you. And it was something that just like gave me dopamine and oxytocin. It created, beautiful moments with my daughter that were memories, that I'll always have. And they were things that like mattered to me in that moment. It's that passion equals purpose kind of, mentality. It's that, once I felt like I was passionate about these things, I started feeling better as a human. And when I was going and doing the things that they were telling me to do, I didn't feel good as a human. I felt punitive and I felt like, oh, this is going to be really stressful because I'm going to have to get on a bus, and go to these appointments with my daughter. And then I'm late and they tell me I can't come in because I'm, more than 10 minutes late. So it was making my life so chaotic that it didn't feel like healing. It didn't feel good. And the medications made me feel like I was neutral. And I'm this big personality. I'm dynamic, and I felt neutral. And so I found things that worked for me that were a little weird and outside the box. If I said Disney songs brought me recovery, that's weird,
It's
but
authentic.
right. But it's true, and then things came later, like learning how to cook. I never cooked before. And so I'd pick up a magazine. I'd sneak a magazine from a hospital emergency room or something and take it home. And then I would cook something beautiful and delicious and, be proud that I created that. So I had to kind of find my own way by finding the things that made me feel good. But once I felt good, then I felt worthy of other things and could take different steps. And I did end up going to therapy eventually, and it was good, but the first one I didn't click with. So it wasn't good. And so it's really about all that holistic being embedded in it. And so, maybe somebody does try a medication Maybe they check the vitamin D levels and see what's going on, because we're all deficient, in vitamin D, at least in Oregon. And then, what else? Like, what do you love? Maybe they don't even remember what they love anymore, but introducing things that are going to make that person feel like a whole person, because when we're not good, we don't feel like a whole person anymore. So holistic 100%, and choices, that person-driven, person-directed care.
Yeah. For me, it was really about, getting out of a lifestyle and learning that I even had trauma, right? Like I didn't know. I didn't know what trauma meant. I didn't know that I had a lot of it. And what helped after I got out of treatment was housing, because I was in crisis mode constantly, because I was in survival mode. Really, it wasn't crisis mode, it was survival mode. Living on the streets for nearly 10 years really, set a chronic pattern for me. And I'd lived in 9 states and I didn't know how to stay anywhere longer than 6 months. And so when I got into a program called Hope Springs, and that was through Lutheran Family Services and Community Action in Washington County and here in Oregon, they provided me with a 2-bedroom apartment for me and my daughter, for a year, or for 2 years, and then another 3 years with Section 8 housing.
That's
So it
amazing.
allowed me not to go back to the old ways that I made money. It allowed me to be in one place long enough to even learn how to unpack my suitcases. I was in my first apartment there for nearly the first year, before one of the other girls in the same complex who was part of this program, she was really aesthetic, and had all these decorations. She knew how to nest. She had 2 daughters, and I would always go over to her place because it was cozy. Mine was like a shell, even though they gave me furniture. I didn't know how to unpack. And one day she goes, "Angel, are you ever going to unpack?" I'm like, I don't really know how. Like, I had lived in suitcases for so long. I didn't know how to. I think it was so deeply ingrained that that I was going to be leaving again within that 6 months. It was kind of conditioned and programmed in my DNA, and so part of our system today is broken because we're not creating kind of a pathway for people to get out of, survival mode, find a place of wellness and healing, access these other types of supports, whether traditional or non-traditional. And then some life skills need to come along with that. I had survival skills. I knew how to work wonders on the streets, right? I knew how to survive, but I didn't know how to.
But did you know how to do a resume?
No, I didn't know how to do a resume, and the things
Did
I
you
did
know
for
how to
a
get your
living, I
oil
couldn't
check?
put on a resume, right?
Right.
So then I had to take transferable skills,
darling.
and that's how I got my
Awesome.
AmeriCorps job, was just like translating. Oh, customer service, sales, people skills, persuasion. Yeah. So, giving
That is
like
awesome.
a true path for that's like long term. We have so many short term programs and punitive programs. If you use, or if you're a pot smoker, but you're in recovery, or if you're a social drinker, all of these judgments around what people's pathway looks like. Like, if you want to get off alcohol or meth, but you're still doing this, and your quality of life and your ability to thrive in your life, that's your path.
Yeah.
But we don't have any programs that support those types of things.
So very few.
They're coming.
Very
They're
few.
coming.
They're coming,
Yes,
but they're
yes.
not
They're
enough.
coming. Well, yeah, I agree. And this path that we're looking for, I think, needs to start for children. It needs to
Yes.
start with the very, very earliest exposure to the
Yeah.
institutions. I mean, we start telling children in school age, in preschool, that they're not right, or not a good fit, or don't learn correctly, or need to do things a certain way. You got to hold your pencil like this. And I mean,
You gotta hold the pencil like this. I'm like, what the I'm like this, okay?
Wow.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just allowing people, giving people more space to figure stuff out, and we kind of circle back to this group of people that I'm drawn to, that are just kind of operating on the fringe, and sometimes I think to myself, my goodness, what is so attractive about that? And I think it's the freedom.
It's the
It's the freedom.
Mhm.
And of course, there's also sometimes there's a lot of risk and danger.
Mhm.
But it can be very liberating.
Yeah.
Liberating.
Well, and I think
to be
like you get
outside of
used to
that.
that, right?
Yeah.
Like we're
Mhm.
resilient, you know.
Mhm.
So to us, what might be seem dangerous, living down under the bridge in a
Mhm.
tent
Mhm.
doesn't seem dangerous.
Yeah.
It seems more dangerous to some of
Yes.
them to go to a shelter, where you might get bed
Mhm.
bugs, where,
Get your
you
stuff
might have
stolen.
aggressive interactions, get
Mhm.
your things stolen,
Mhm.
So to have the freedom of having your own tent in
Mhm.
a community, in a
Mhm.
family,
Mhm.
because a lot of times that's what it is. They take care of each other, they feed each other.
Mhm.
That feels more safe
Mhm.
than some of the services,
Yeah.
that are being offered to
Mhm.
people.
Yes.
So I get it.
Yeah.
Who
Yep,
defines
same.
safety, right?
Yeah.
Like our system, part of the brokenness of our system is we're defining safety for people rather than embracing that safety looks different for everyone
Mhm.
and honoring what that means and asking people, what does safe look like to you,
Yeah.
right? Without judgment. I got this core value that I want to live in a structured house, right? And so we place our values on other people's in their lives, and
Yeah.
and just because we value it doesn't mean it's something that someone else values.
Yeah. This was years back, but I did a conference in Washington, D.C., and I was staying at the DuPont, in DuPont Circle, this like ritzy, hotel. And every night, my partner and I would go downtown and we'd grab dinner or whatever. And then we would take our leftovers, we'd package them up, two or three, and we would walk around and basically introduce ourselves to people. Hey, is anybody hungry? We'd use it as an opportunity to, chat with folks and, meet people. And we met this guy and his name was Jim, and he was just like the most amazing, like articulate, super smart human. And he was explaining us to the systems, in DC and services. And in this like really naive moment, I go, Jim, I'm like, dude, you're so awesome. I'm like, why are you homeless? I don't get it. You're such a smart guy. And he goes, okay, Fawn. So question, he's like, if you won $1 million today, what would you buy? What's the first thing you'd buy? And I go, well, I own this big old house in the city and it was expensive and it was falling apart. It was a money pit. And I go, well, I said, I would probably pay off my house, and get it fixed up and, try to do some things to secure this house, for my family. And he goes, no, he's like, you wouldn't live up there. And he pointed up at like the penthouses up at the top. They're all glowing, gorgeous. And I go, yeah, I'm like, I don't know. I kind of like my big old farmhouse in the city. That's not really my style. He goes, it's not your normal. And I was like, no, it's not my normal. And he goes, and that big house in the city, that big old farmhouse you want to save? He's like, that's not my normal either. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like I hear you right now, And he said, Fawn, he said, this is my normal. He said, I don't have to worry about that Midtown Neighborhood Association complaining about my grass. Mm-hmm. He said, I don't have to worry about the electric company, blowing my phone up, because I need to pay my bill. I don't have to worry about the taxes on the property. He's like, those are all things that you're okay with. That's your normal. He's like, I'm not okay with those things. He's like, I like my life just the way it is. And if I won $1 million, I wouldn't live up there either. He goes, I'd probably live here, to be totally honest with you. He's like, you see that guy over there under that blue tarp? That's my buddy. We've known each other years. And I was just like, ugh. Like it made so much sense to me. Like, no, that's not your normal. Just like that penthouse is not my normal. And so we need to be okay with people having their normal. And whatever that looks like. And, rather than saying, oh, hey, let me get you a house, maybe they just want a sweater.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I totally get it. I totally get it. Yeah.
So, yeah, I just think, when we talk about, these systems, I mean, we all know they're broken and, we see what's going on, every day, on the news, downtown, like people are not okay. People are not okay because of COVID. People are not okay because, they've had to stay in their homes and people are getting very withdrawn, from actually going out and having these, interactions with people in person. And so when we talk about rapid radiant reform, which Aware talks about, that's why, we want rapid, obviously, like now. Like systems are needed now. People are dying, people are feeling terrible, with their mental health. People who were okay before coronavirus are not okay now.
The general population, when you think about the people who have had to navigate the behavioral health, mental health, addiction, and beyond systems pre-COVID, are actually more resilient in surviving through the challenges of the last 2 years of the world changing, because they're continuing to move forward, and it's not as have, at least the people that I've talked to have expressed that this is just still part of their norm, right? It's just surviving through something, right?
For real.
Right.
Yeah.
And then people who have never, they're like, oh, my whole world is shook up, right? And that have never had accessed services before. Now they're seeing how traumatized the people who've been utilizing these systems are getting just by trying to reach out for supports and then getting a diagnosis or getting, treated as they're mentally ill. Some of our hospital systems emergency room systems are horrible, though they'll use words like trauma-informed care. And the reality of it is, no, they're not trauma aware. They might be informed, but they're not practicing it.
It's impossible to practice that kind of thing in the state of that they're working.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the shifts are too long. There are too many patients. They themselves are traumatized and experiencing depression and suicide at rates that aren't really systematically documented, but that are generally known to be far above those of the general population.
And severely understaffed, I'm sure, because a lot of first responders were like, I'm good.
Yes.
I'll do something else.
Yeah. It's too much. It's too much.
Yeah. And I think also a lack of consistency across systems of how to train and support their colleagues, how the use of language. We come in with our lenses of the people that we serve, right? And when we're working in the system, if we haven't really kind of been there and empathized with the customers that were patients, or however people define them, individuals accessing services, then some things that people keep up are these protection guards to not get close or feel for, which is traumatizing to them as in their role. That's the vicarious trauma, the historical trauma that comes from just working within the system. We really got to take care of the people working in the system in the way that we would hope that they would take care of the people they're serving. I think that's one of our biggest flaws in our system.
I agree. And one example would be that in just before med school, before you start med school, the average student would be less likely to have depressive symptoms. And then once that person starts medical school, the first year of medical school, those rates of depression go up.
Wow.
Yeah. So they would be less likely before they start medical school. And then once they start medical school.
And then imagine working in these systems for 20, years. 30 years. Yeah.
Yes, it can really take a toll. It can take a toll.
Well, and so what can we do about it?
Wow.
Yes. What can we do about it? Because, I think that wellness initiatives are, crucial. I mean, I just worked at OHSU Adventist, and, I had a great experience over there. I worked with a lot of amazing doctors, a lot of amazing case managers. But like you said, they're overloaded, so, you have people coming in who need more. A lot of them really just need to have one human being connect with them in a real way. And when you've got a nurse who's hitting room after room after room, she doesn't have time to stand there and talk, for 20 minutes about somebody's past traumas, and all of those things. So, I mean, that's why I think peer support is so huge. And I think the system is getting it. Like, peer supports are super important in this system and they're getting it. But I think what's happening is that, because it's becoming such a boom for like, yes, everybody wants a peer, that peer implementation into these programs is lacking and it's falling to the wayside. So, peers are getting co opted into the same roles. So, peer fidelity is important and that's why it works. But when you put a peer into a system that's strictly medical model and they're being coached by everyone around them, totally no malice, right? You get on a team and you've got a case manager and you've got a therapist and you've got all these people and they want to help you learn your job. So instead you learn to be just like them.
Yeah.
And it's like
creating more of the same.
Yes.
Totally.
Creating more of the same. And
Yeah.
that's the piece that, if we're looking at the micro, meso, and macro system, as you're dumping, because that's what's happened, when CMA, Center for Medicaid Systems, coded peer recovery supports as a billing code. What happened, that was in 2007. Now all of these all these states are saying, okay, now we can bill Medicaid, we can put these roles in there, we can fund these positions that everybody's wanted in these roles. And then what happened is that everybody's scrambling without clear planning or thought. Everybody's misinterpreting what these peers and mentors are supposed to be doing, and they're becoming co-opted by becoming mini clinicians because of that reason. And they're also thinking about it in a way that so the direct service peer support, there's no career ladder for them to stay in the fidelity of peer support, which then is the holistic. The evidence shows this is the fidelity of holistic ways of being with people and meet all the social determinants of health. So it's because there's no career ladder, peers, leads, coordination, supervisors, managers, directors, there's nowhere for them to grow within the organization. So then they go over here and they start getting credentialed in QMHA, QMHP, CADC, all of these clinical roles because they want advancement and they want to make more money because they want to thrive in their careers now that they have some hope and excitement about working in a system of helper. And when they're doing this, now they're thinking about this as a peer program rather than a peer department to allow them to grow. And that's a huge failure in our system for planning. They did not plan well. They started dumping. So now what we've been doing is going in and helping them restructure these job descriptions. Like I read so many job descriptions, I'm looking at them like, you're recruiting many clinicians. The language you're using in here is for a clinician, but you're throwing peer language here and there and saying lived experience and all this other stuff. And I'm like, your language will tell you who you're going to find. And if it's people who want to be more of the same, then let them go be clinicians.
Totally.
Give them a pathway. So looking at your job descriptions, looking at your policies and procedures, looking at the infrastructure in which you're training your rest of your staff on what the role is, what it isn't, and where are the gray areas that can morph them into being co-opted. How do you prevent that from happening? That's
and how they
Yeah.
work together, right?
Yeah.
Like definitions of like, this is why, a case manager is what they are and why they're important in the system. This is why a peer is important in the system, so that
And how
you're
they're
not
mutually
just meshing the whole
Yes.
role.
And they're mutual members of the team. They are not,
Absolutely.
those are just the peers. We'll give them all the shit that we don't want to do.
Right.
Right. And pay them well. Pay them
wage
well.
disparities are huge.
Wage
in peer
disparities
support.
are huge. Well, and if you think about, there was one piece in there that I was thinking, I just totally lost it. So I'll come back to it. But it's just really frustrating because we're not getting necessarily the results. We've got all these. Oh, I remember I was gonna say about a hospital system that I won't say which, but it's only been around a couple years, and I had staff in this hospital system. What was most heartbreaking is you got some really amazing hospital staff that work on the milieu, you've got the docs and what have you. But when you have, a handful of peers in this large group of clinical staff that are all like confused, even what peers are doing, and then the peers get tokenized, you've got all these really seasoned, well trained, well experienced peers coming into this larger system. And then they're sitting in these huddles, and the clinical staff is using judgmental language like, oh, they're a meth enthusiast. Oh, they're just drug seeking. They're attention seeking. What's happening is that lack of training and education on that clinical staff
around trauma
about
awareness.
trauma awareness and the
Mhm.
language they're using now started to like offend the peers. And then they went in with fire, excited to be part of a team. And now they're like, I don't want to talk because
Mhm.
I'm one of those people.
I'm one of those people.
And they're talking about that guy like that. And like, now I'm getting pissed off. Our
Well, and a
staff
need
were
to fit in,
traumatized.
right? A lot of times, you don't work for years and years because of everything that's going on with your life. And then all of a sudden you get this great job, this great job at a clinic or this great job at a treatment facility. And you just want to be a part of the team and you just want to fit in, So when people are making, crappy little jokes and stuff, you go, uncomfortably, but you don't stand up for yourself because the last thing you want to do is lose that job. And you want to fit in. You want people to like you.
And I think that is something to be said for other people on the team
Yes,
as well.
yeah.
And yes, I think it really takes a lot to speak out. I think, again, in some of these more rigid corporate healthcare settings.
Yes.
There just
Bingo.
isn't a lot of there's not a lot of space to be authentic sometimes, and it does affect your collegiality with the other people that you're working with at all levels. And I would say my inclination to be authentic and to connect with people I'm serving and with the people I'm working with, I feel like has led to me kind of being a little bit
On the
outside
outs.
of outside of what would be considered, respectable physician stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I love that you said collegial.
Yeah.
With dyslexia, that's hard to even say. So that's a big word like mayonnaise. Right?
So, I mean, I think it is important to call these things out.
Yeah.
And important to just understand how far reaching these kind of artificial expectations are held up in the healthcare system, and how hurtful they are and how damaging they are, not just to the peers, but to anybody who's trying to authentically work in that system and provide trauma aware care. Yes, there are just a lot of barriers, and it causes a lot of isolation on the job. Very interesting conversation. I think you guys are right on.
I think we should also point out, some of the popularity leadership that is driving some of or actually competing for a lot of the state funding and federal funding that aren't necessarily they're the credentialing bodies that credential like drug and alcohol counselors and QMHAs and peers and mentors and when you have people in the roles of leadership that bring their own bias around even addiction and mental health working and being one and the same, there's a problem, right? And that's the very, very prominent problem here in Oregon that I've seen, and why the segregation. If we're all working together, well, I know that if somebody's pushing against one model, it's because it's threatening their funding streams or their way of driving their power and control, and that's heartbreaking. And that's happened a lot here in Oregon, especially this last decade. So just really calling that out. I'm not going to name names, not going to do any of that. It's not about that. It's about identifying that there are strong voices on a lot of tables strategically so that they can access funds and keep those things very separate. And we need to make a change.
The consolidation of resources and kind of funneling of resources to one special group.
Well,
Yeah.
and it's like, to me, common sense is like if something is broken, you fix it, right? You don't throw more money at it. And so that kind of irritates me. It's like, there's all of these programs that are not producing great outcomes, like just plain and simple. And because they've managed to get in on some funding, some state funding, and federal funding, it's like once you're in, you're always in, so they just continue to pay these organizations that aren't doing that great of work. I'm sorry, but the plain and simple fact of the matter is we're like, what, 48th on the list for mental health outcomes? Like that's not
And
good
addiction.
outcomes. And addiction.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not great outcomes. And
Not
so there
considering the
needs,
healthcare resources we have here in this state.
Yeah.
We should be on the cutting edge.
We should be.
totally,
Yeah.
We
and
used to be known in Oregon for doing some really progressive stuff, and now it's like that was a long time ago.
yeah.
And we're a hot mess.
And now it's a
Yeah.
hot mess.
We opened up another Oregon State hospital, 50
Yeah.
miles away when other parts of the country were shutting down these larger institutions. It's cost averaged back in the day. I don't know what the numbers are now, but it was $24,000 per person per month to house them in a large institution like the Oregon State Hospital. And Greater Oregon Behavioral Health, Community Counseling Solutions, lots of different behavioral health organizations were pushing for smaller community-based programs, secured SRTFs, secured residential facilities, treatment facilities, which on average are $1,200 to $2,500 per person per month. I mean, huge savings, let alone what keeping people in their own communities, near their own social supports, near their families, versus shipping them off. And now they don't even use
Breaking their
the second
support
hospital.
systems.
They don't even hardly use the second hospital that they spend so much money on. We fought against it when they were just in the blueprint phase. And I was told literally, like, what are we doing? And the leader back then of Oregon Health Authority said, well, Angel, we can't stop now. We've spent millions on the blueprints. I'm just like, well, then cut your losses. What are you
Reroute
doing?
the money to
We're
something
going
that works.
backwards, not forwards.
Yes. Yeah. Sad,
Yeah.
but true. And I think we can see there how money is a huge driver.
It is.
Huge.
Money, and the money that we spend on healthcare for the poor results that we get is it's an abomination.
Yeah.
It's an abomination. But I think as long as there's record corporate profits in healthcare, it's going to be very difficult to turn the tide, which is why I think the work that we're doing is so important, because it really starts at a grassroots level with personal stories and personal experiences and community, drawing on the community-based resources and trying to lift those voices up.
Yeah. Well, and I guess my hope too is, like the more that we make people trauma aware, the better the systems will get, the better the people working in the systems will get, to be able to deliver the services in a way that are effective. If you're incorporating trauma aware principles into your policies, your procedures, your onboarding for all of your employees, your auditing processes, programs should be being audited for that. I've worked at organizations where, terrible things were happening. People were like melting down in the parking lot and crying and like, about their services. Medications were being withheld, just all of these things. Those never make it to an incident report.
Yeah.
And so an auditor is never
Or an
even going to
ethics
see that.
complaint.
Never
or-
going to see it. Totally. So the money needs to be more on top of that as far as auditing these programs for that type of stuff, because that is what is detouring people from actually getting the help that they need. And
the barriers.
if you don't know any better, it's pretty hard to hold somebody accountable, right? So awareness in my mind is just like the baseline of why that needs to be bled into every single service, and recognizing that every single person that you come in contact with may have trauma. Nobody's walking around with some blinking sign on their forehead like, hey, trauma survivor, And so one of the things that we say in our trainings is that it could be anybody, if you're, going on your way to work and, the girl, the cashier that, you're talking to is fumbling over your change and making you late for your day, and you're frustrated with her. You don't know where she slept last night. You have no idea who is dealing with trauma
You don't know if she
currently
just
or
got her
in the
ass beat
past.
by
Yeah.
a partner, right?
Seriously.
We don't know.
We
You
have
don't
no
know
idea.
nothing. Like, stop
Yeah.
already,
And
right?
how many people do we know who are personal friends who work in these systems who you would never know that they go home and deal with chaos,
Mhm.
because they're not telling anybody
Oh, yeah.
because of judgment.
Yes, exactly.
Or the risk of losing your kids,
Yeah,
or
or your
risk of losing
job.
your
Yes.
job, or
Mhm.
your housing, and
Yeah.
or maybe you're living in your van
Yeah.
Yeah.
and nobody knows. I
Yep.
mean, there's so many. So so access. Let's talk a little bit about access. So I think back to I have a friend that her son was the young man who lit the person on fire at the 7-Eleven back in the day.
Wow.
And she actually worked for our company, and the access to supports for this mother trying to get like mental health services when this person, her son, was young, to get like actual supports, and even getting the police to take him in. She was so just desperate, and every door was shut, and police were telling her, we can't do anything until he breaks the law. Well, okay, so now he sits the rest of his life in prison, right? And there
Or
was just
catches a
actually
charge that he won't be able to get a job later.
yeah,
You know?
yeah. Well, and the poor person that got lit on fire, right? Like
Yeah.
this is what we're talking about. And when I worked in the children's system, and I won't name the organization that had been around 100 years, that's no longer there. This was not a place for kids. Every kid that came in there from 6 to 18 years old was immediately given a diagnosis and immediately started on medication. And the 6-year-olds were learning behaviors from every kid above this age. And I was just looking around. I'm like, everything was bolted down. There was no plants. There was no
No
nothing.
vibrance.
And I'm like, this is not a place of wellness. This is a place of behavior modification and medication. And it was heartbreaking. These kids lived in this, came back and forth to this center over and over, and they were secured residential facilities. They were put in seclusion and restraints. And oh my God, I'm like, when I was struggling with my daughter, I'm like, I am not, there's nowhere for me to get help for my kid here, because I would not send my kid to one of these places. I had to ship her
Totally.
to boarding school on the East Coast. And people judge me like, you're sending your kid all the way to, over to New York to a Christian boarding school, even though, yeah, because I don't want her going over here.
Have you seen their outcomes?
Heavy, and
Just
granted,
saying.
there's some challenges with some of those things
Yeah.
too, but I had to, like, the lesser of two evils, right? Like, you're not going to feed my kid a bunch of like 6 or 7. We got a young woman in training today that just shared that she was in one of these systems and was on 8 medications, and she is now what did she say? She's like, her body does not respond to certain medications at all anymore.
Yep. That's right.
And I'm like, gosh, like, so points of access, and then allowing for these payers, these insurance companies, and then big pharma that drives all of this. In 1954, the first psychiatric medication was developed, and it was called Thorazine. And experts back then said that mental illness would not exist by the year 2000. Until what? Until we started making a ton of money. So if there's anybody listening to this that is a medication salesperson, no, we will not accept your big pharma medication for donation, but thank you
or your
anyway.
free pens
Or your free
steak
pens.
dinner,
No, we're not
or
interested. No,
Sticky
no.
pads.
sticky pads.
We don't
Clocks.
want to put your name,
Mugs.
your prescription drug underneath our podcast. Those of you who would like to support our podcast, feel free to let us know, because we want to create funding streams that will allow alternative, which should be the primary supports, to be created.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and so I just have a couple of things on my list. Like, easier access, right? I mean, you think about wait lists, you think about making people jump through hoops, restricting medication unless they go to therapy, some of these things that it's like, it's counterproductive, so easier access, period. Inclusion into all services, that holistic approach of, offering people everything, like offer them everything, help them find anything, because maybe one little thing, creates a spark, and that's, the barreling factor that creates that ripple.
Or better yet, ask them.
Yeah, totally.
What do you think you need?
What would you like to do?
And they'll be like, learned helplessness is set in, right? For a while. Like they're used to other people telling them what they need. So they might, repeat thinking that they're going to tell you what you need to hear or what you want to hear.
Totally.
But ask them all the time. So is this working for you? What else would you like? And stop restricting supporters, whoever that support person is, to a 15-minute, 30-minute, 45-minute, 1 hour limit of providing support. Depending on your role will dictate what you can do. You mentioned last week, I think it was, you were only allowed to have 15 minutes with your patients when they came in. And it's like, what? Right?
Yeah.
Like, so if you've got peer support, use peer support, but use them in the way that they're intended. And if it takes 5 years to walk somebody out of the old cycle of what they see dictates what they do and what they get, that comes from intentional peer support. Again, I'm just naming that. Help them get out of that pattern. If it takes 5 years, if it takes 10 years, stop limiting the funding on how long people get these supports because it doesn't happen overnight.
No. Well, they didn't get to those places overnight either.
Right.
And there was just no quick fix. And I think that's where the healthcare system is looking for a shortcut. For instance, a drug.
Yeah.
A drug. Yeah. Band-Aid.
Well,
like
we'll fix it. Yeah. Yes. But it's so much more complicated than that.
Yeah. Well, and harm reduction, right? Like harm reduction completely. 6 cigarettes a day is better than 10.
Right.
Pot's better than heroin. It really is super simple, but in this system that just wants to omit everything, it's like, okay.
It's very binary.
It is.
It's very binary. Yes. Are you doing it right? Are you doing it wrong?
Right. Yeah. There's no in the middle, but
even our court system.
Yeah, we all know that pathway veers. It's that dance.
Yeah.
It's this dance of, does this work? No. Does this work? Okay, maybe, and figuring those things out. And then all of a sudden you're 20 years down the road and you're like, oh my God.
Nailed it.
For real. I understood the assignment.
I understood the assignment.
But it takes time to get there, and it takes falling down, and it takes error. But if you have someone who can support you through that, or lots of someone's, can you imagine that? That would be beautiful.
And yes, and I love that idea. And it's just in the clinical setting, it's that idea of always wanting people to come back, I mean, sometimes
creating
I have
customers.
people come to me and they say, well, they're just not ready. I was like, should we just reschedule? And I'm like, no, we don't want them to reschedule. We need to see them more than ever now to try to figure out what we can do to help them meet their goals.
Right.
It's like we don't want to wait until, okay, I'm going to do what you told me to do now.
Right.
We want to take that harm reduction approach quite literally and bring them in and share information and hear their ideas and really trying to find a way to
collaborate with the individual whose care it is.
Wow.
Oh my God.
That's crazy. Does that actually work?
Right? Does that work for people?
Wow.
Like, who knew?
This shit's about to go down.
Patients love it.
Yeah.
They love it. What? Their voice was heard?
Right.
Oh my gosh,
It's
they didn't
amazing.
feel judged.
Well, and here's the thing. So I'm a marketing person, right? Like, I love marketing. And when you think about that, okay, in the scheme of all systems, right? If you deliver a good product, guess who's going to be the best marketing value, the best word of mouth out there is that person who got those great services.
Yeah.
So in the mind of somebody who's making money, in the mind of somebody who's running an agency, I just want to be like, don't you understand that if you give these great services to people, they're going to go out there and they're going to tell everybody, and then more people are going to come in. So if you're a business savvy human, you should recognize that incorporating trauma awareness, across your agency period, making things easier access, making, less barriers for people to get these services is going to get the word out about how great your services are.
And here's what people say. Oh, but then they'll manipulate us to get more drugs. Well, we're teaching them to come to our place to get drugs. We're teaching them to get a bed, and we're teaching them to get shelter.
Yeah.
And yeah, I won't say the name, but at a hospital that I was working at, that's exactly what administration is like. Stop judging people walking through the door. They're coming to get a need met. And if they're coming to get a need met, give them their need, or stop teaching them to do so, right? And allow for people to say, yeah, I'm feeling really, really, really like I'm withdrawing right now. Okay, so let's get you your drug so that then, and administer it in a safe environment.
Yeah.
And then what would you like to do next? Oh, I'm going to leave. Okay, we'll see you when you come back. There's actually organizations doing that right now. It's like they're giving them their dose of heroin in a safe environment. And society and people with judgment around, you're enabling. No, that's harm reduction.
You're
That's
making them safe.
That's giving them a safe place to get to a place of when they're ready, so that they don't die in it out on the streets.
Well, and then the connection.
You're
maintain
building
the
a relationship.
So if somebody is coming to you because they want a safe use, you still are creating this connection with this individual, and little tiny sparks are happening all the time. Maybe they're sitting around waiting for their safe site and having a conversation with somebody about the discontent that they're having, within their life and within their use. All of those things are getting them one step closer to a satisfactory or beyond a thriving life. And so if you scare them off, then what? Where are they getting that?
I'm only going to go back there and I'm going to have major attitude because this person treated me like shit and judged me the whole time, because I already feel a lot of shame and guilt because I'm stuck or hurt or traumatized or whatever. And then I'm getting that treatment. Yeah.
We know that harm reduction changes outcomes.
Man, it's beautiful.
It changes outcomes. Yes. And we need to change the way, I think, to effectively change the culture of healthcare. We need to change the way we measure outcomes, and it can't be all measured in profitability.
Right.
Yeah.
Driving all of the staff to get all this encounter data. It's like I've seen systems with their peers. They're working 40 hours a week and they're having to have 30 hours of encounter data. I'm like, you've just created a mini clinician and more of the same. You're not using these peers in the way that they need. Oh, but we got to fund them. Well, then find other ways to fund them. Generate unrestricted revenue, get, other ways to fund them.
Measure different outcomes.
Yeah. So it can't be all quantitative. It's got to have some qualitative aspects of the outcome measures. Yeah.
Well, and
Quality
so,
of life.
we're getting pretty close to our time. And so I just kind of wanted to, bring us back to Keep Calm and Connect, and why, we are, putting that out there to organizations, whether it's provider organizations, agencies, and corporations now, which is super exciting, because Keep Calm and Connect is the core of trauma aware care. And, so if we're, delivering these trainings within the ranks, if people are getting these trainings, they're coming out with a different understanding of what trauma awareness is, not only for the people they serve, but also within themselves. And, going in and helping with policies and procedures, helping people design programs and systems that are trauma aware. Because I really truly believe that that's it. That's the beginning. That's the beginning of making, these programs better. And then we start hitting, the money, we start going and trying to figure out why this money is siloed the way that it is to programs that don't work, that are ineffective,
But if we build the army and people understand,
if you build it, they will.
That's
come.
right. And people understand the idea behind the work of trauma awareness, yes, then I think they will come to it with a different perspective, and eventually these people grow up to be the leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I
I'm
can't
not on
think of
my
a
phone.
better
I'm looking
way.
for something for us to
Yeah.
say.
I just can't think of a better way to, improve these systems. And then within that, once you have a system that's running, in a trauma aware way, leadership becomes super important. There's a lot of programs out there as well that just, supervision's just not even a thing, and I've promoted supervision within these systems, for years and years, because I mean, who doesn't want to know how they're doing at their job?
Right.
It's nice to be able to, have a supervision to check in and say, hey, I had a rough week, and be able to process that, because once again, that's why we burn out.
Yeah.
Because we have really hard jobs, and vicarious trauma is 100% real. And so, incorporating supervision, incorporating wellness initiatives, agency wide, as well as, leadership, promoting leadership that is trauma aware.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I know we're at time.
Yeah.
So episode 3, we have recovery isn't linear, it's unique to the individual. And I know we touched a little bit on this, but maybe we can dive in, or maybe even find a guest to come talk about recovery and what it looks like to them.
Yeah. And we appreciate everybody listening right now, as well as follow us, be a part of our mission. Join us, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, find us wherever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's grow this army.
Yeah.
Let's do this.
Yay.
Have a great
Are
week.
you aware?
Are you aware?
Are you?
Hey,
Are you aware?
first.
Have a good day, guys.